Hey, how's it going, everybody? It's your boy, Delightful Kiss Boy, and today I want to try to answer the question as to whether or not you specifically should learn how to code. Now, I'm doing this because somebody recently reached out to me asking me some questions about computer science, whether or not there's job security still, etc., etc. And so I just kind of wanted to give a broad picture of my experience within the industry, and hopefully that helps people out there who are maybe considering going for a career in tech or just feeling like playing around with coding, learning a little bit, that sort of a thing. So I just kind of want to lay it out all on the table for you to hear about. I was going to make a PowerPoint presentation for this, but I figured I'm just going to do a yap sesh and we're going to see how this goes. All right. So anyway, first of all, I just want to give you kind of a brief overview of my experience within computer science and coding. All right. So basically, up until about senior year of high school, the second semester of senior year, more specifically, I had barely coded at all. And then I took one coding class, and I absolutely loved it. And so I switched the entire trajectory of what I wanted to do in college as soon as I took that class, essentially. Then I got into college, and I got a bachelor's degree in computer science. All right? Didn't get any post-grad shit, none of that, all right? Nothing fancy. While I was in school, though, in college, I got a summer-long internship at Company A, is what I'm going to call them, a big tech company. Basically, I applied for a bunch of different internships, and they all turned me down, except Company A was my last interview, and I'd kind of developed enough interviewing skill by failing at all those other interviews that I actually landed that one, and then I got a return offer after that internship. It was a paid internship, paid pretty well, relatively speaking. Got a generous return offer, which was really sick. So then I finished my last year, graduated, and then took a little bit of a trip, and then pretty much immediately started working at Company A after I finished with my trip, got back. So I worked at Company A for about 4 years after that point. Had some ups and downs with it. I was very motivated at the beginning. Towards the end, I started to get a little burnt out particularly because of Company A's. The team I was on had a pretty hellish on-call schedule, which I'll get into later when I talk about what the day-to-day kind of looks like in big tech, that sort of thing. But then I ended up moving to Google, and it was a little bit more chill of a vibe. And pretty much enjoyed working at Google. There were some things I didn't like about the org I was in, and yada yada yada. But then ultimately, after about 3.5 years at Google, my team got laid off and replaced by a cheaper team in India, basically. So that's kind of the story of high-level overview of my experience in the industry. I'm currently unemployed because I'm just taking a year off to do my own thing. But yeah, so anyway, that's my experience. Now let's go into some specifics of whether or not you should look into coding, all right? So TLDR is basically like, probably, okay, the reason I say probably instead of like maybe is that if you're watching this video, chances are you're at least curious about coding, all right? And if that's the case, then by all means, try it out. Watch some videos about it, some basics, Maybe I'll make some basic coding tutorials. Let me know if you'd be interested in that, But there's plenty of those resources out there. You can watch on YouTube and see if it kind of makes sense to you, if it starts to be kind of exciting to you when you're watching some of these videos, or if you think it's going to be a complete drudgery, right? Because I was pretty easily able to tell if it was going to be a thing that I liked or not, just from the short period of time I was taking a class on it, and I was very, basic stuff, right? So, if you're at all curious, I would say just, give it a shot. Don't devote, a ton of resources to it until you're pretty sure you're really interested in it, right? Of course, if you have no interest in coding, then don't. Don't waste your time, right? But if you're kind of in the middle and you're kind of like, well, I'm kind of interested and I don't really know if I want to look into it, I would say some indicators of whether or not you might like coding if you try it out, and it might be, you might seriously consider devoting a little bit of time to it, maybe taking a class at a community college, that sort of thing. these are some indicators just from my perspective that I've seen in myself and other people. And it doesn't mean that if you don't have any of these, it means don't go into coding or coding isn't for you. That's not at all what I'm saying. I'm just saying if you're on the fence, these are some indicators you can look for. All right. So number one is pretty obvious. Do you like computers? All right. This one might be a little exclusionary if you don't. If you don't like computers, then don't learn how to code. It's not gonna make you love computers. It's kind of like you need to have a foundation of enjoying spending a lot of time on a computer, diddling around, doing whatever. You know, it could be like browsing the internet. It could be like playing video games. If you like modding video games, that's a pretty good indication. Like, you know, just even downloading mods and making games, you know, customizing games. If you get into kind of the graphics settings where you're trying to optimize graphics, that sort of a thing, you know, that's a pretty good indication. Number two would be, do you like making spreadsheets, right? For whatever. It could be something that helps you track something in a video game, you know, maybe like a damage calculator for Path of Exile or something. You know, maybe you have a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet or Google Sheets. If you like spreadsheets, there's a pretty good chance you'll like coding. I have a friend who got a degree in chemistry, went into his field, and then got really into optimizing processes at the company that he was working at using spreadsheets. And when I was talking to him about it, I'm like, you're basically coding. You're just using, you know, Excel to code. I mean, it is coding when you can do some pretty elaborate stuff with spreadsheets. And so then he was like, oh, interesting. And so he went back to school and got another degree in computer science, and he's been doing that ever since, and he likes it a lot better. So yeah, I mean, spreadsheets, that's all coding. Something that's a little less like technical is, I would say, do you like puzzles in general? Do you like playing puzzle games? Do you like doing, I don't know, logic puzzles or whatever, like Sudokus, that sort of a thing, you know? It's not a one-to-one mapping between people who like puzzles and people who like to code, you know? But I think it's a good indicator because that's sometimes kind of the, you know, you'll have like similar types of thinking when you're doing coding, because it's like, it's all problem solving at the end of the day, right? You're kind of sitting down, you have a problem you need to solve. I mean, it's problem solving and design, but having a strong foundation in problem solving, which is kind of like, you know, it's something that kind of exhibits itself in being good at or liking doing puzzles, because you're sitting down with a problem, you're like, how do I solve this? If you find that fun and engaging and you find that you're pretty good at it, you could be good at coding. Who knows? And I just want to say, I want to take a moment also to say that there's not like a one-to-one like, if you're not good at coding, that doesn't mean you're dumb at all right? I've known some like really smart people that they just don't really get coding, or it doesn't like resonate with them, but they're like super smart people. It's just like a certain way of thinking that not, you know, everybody is tapped into or likes doing or whatever, and there's nothing wrong with that if it's not your thing, right? But you're not really going to know until you try it out. So, like I said, if you're curious, give it a whirl. So yeah, I'd say that those are some pretty good indications. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I don't know. I mean, I think that those are the ones that I see in myself and other people, right? So, if you're on the fence, if any of those resonate with you, I mean, I'd say give it a whirl. I'd say probably just give it a whirl anyway, right? But don't devote like a ton of time to it until you're sure you want to keep pursuing it, right? Now, beyond that, let's talk about what you can do with your coding skills, right? And kind of maybe if you're like, okay, I kind of like this coding stuff, what are my next steps? Well, it kind of depends on what you want to do with it, right? Do you already have a career path that you want to go down that is not coding related necessarily? You know, in that case, maybe you just want to take it up as a hobby, right? Which can be a lot of fun. Because what you can do is you can do a lot more projects like the shit that I'm doing on my YouTube channel, where you just see something, you see a problem, you have a question, and you have the skill set to sit down and be able to solve it. Maybe you like contributing to open source software, you know, you like going on GitHub and looking at the cool projects that other people are doing, and you're like, I want to be able to contribute to that in my free time. If that's the case, then yeah, just keep doing it as a hobby, you know, keep watching videos and learning about it and reading articles and doing that in your spare time, you know, while you devote more time to your actual career. And there'll probably be opportunities for you to bring it into your actual career. And I've actually seen a good number of people who are able to basically have one position at whatever, company that they're working for, whatever, right? And then that's not related to coding. And then they kind of learn about coding. Maybe they go to a coding boot camp, which I'll get into in a bit, or, whatever. And then they're able to start bringing it into their job, and they can kind of make their position into like a developer position. They kind of naturally just end up moving in that direction. And what's cool about that is you kind of naturally end up working on stuff that you are probably interested in based on your first position, right? It's kind of a natural transition period, right? So I'd say that's like path one. You kind of keep it as a hobby. You can maybe fold it into your current career path, and maybe you're just like, okay, well, this company is like, we like the stuff you're doing, keep doing that, and maybe you'll get a pay bump. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Companies are usually trying to just get you to do extra, more complex work for free, but you can negotiate and you can figure something out potentially, right? Now, option B is like more committal, right? You start taking classes. That can be at like a community college. I would highly encourage you at the very start, if you're still a little bit unsure about it, go to a community college. There's no reason to enroll in like a, university if you're still unsure about it. Just dip your toes in the water, start taking a class. What's nice about a class is it's going to keep you committed to learning, And I don't know, I found that learning in a classroom was like a good way to learn, personally. I would like doing that better than trying to teach myself, and I think it was good, So I'd say take a few classes at a community college. If you enjoy that, you can start looking at either doing a coding boot camp or trying to get a degree in computer science, right? If you go with a coding boot camp, now I'm going to be honest, I'm a little bit skeptical about coding boot camps because I know a lot of people who have done them, and not many of them have seemed to get good results out of them in terms of like landing a career in field. All right. Personally, this is anecdotal. I know that I've heard about some people that it sounds like it worked out great. I'm just anecdotally, I can tell you that a lot of these people struggled to find positions. Okay. And some of them are still said, even though they didn't get a position, it was still worth it to learn that stuff. I don't know. I mean, it's the same kind of thing with people say about college a lot of the time when they're not working in field after spending all this time in college, right? Personally, I want to see results if I'm going to be devoting that much time and money and energy to something. But I can tell you that. I can tell you that my skip level manager, meaning my manager's manager at company A, they told me so basically we were looking for a new member for our team. We were desperately in need of new people, and we were just trying to fill a position fast. All right. And so I mentioned that I had a couple friends who had done coding boot camps and would be interested in the position. And that skip level manager basically just said, no, straight up, we don't want people who have coding boot camp experience. We want people who have university experience. That could just be, my skip there, but he explicitly was just saying, no, we don't want them. So take that as you will. The alternative, like I said, is going to like a university. You start taking classes, you get an undergraduate degree. Unless you're trying to go really specialized, I would not recommend doing post-grad stuff. It's just like bang for your buck and just getting into the field. Like a bachelor's degree is going to do you fine. Even at like a place like Google used to want people who had at least master's degrees, but they took a chuckle fuck like me who's just got an undergrad degree, no problem. Now, to be fully transparent, that was when they were hiring like crazy during COVID. It's now harder to get a position at Google. I kind of got in when it was like a little bit easier, I would say. But still, I think that the average dev does not need a graduate degree in computer science. And if you start working and you figure, I want to go back to school, that's totally doable, because you'll have made some guap, you'll make some of those ducats right off the bat, and then you can go back to school later and maybe go into a more specialized area. Like if you wanted to do machine learning, for example, maybe you want to be a quant. Don't know why you would. I mean, it pays well, but, that sort of shit. Then you can do that. Those options are available to you. And that's one of the things that's really nice about computer science is really the flexibility of the subject, right? There's a lot of different avenues that you can go down, You'll be a software developer, but you'll have vastly different experiences as to like other people, just depending on what area, what focuses you want to have in your career. I mean, I think that's the case for like most engineering sort of jobs, right? Because at the end of the day, software engineering is engineering. And like I said, it's not just like coding, knowing how to code. It's like a lot of what you're doing is going to be problem solving and design. So having, good designs that are going to be sustainable and scalable and stand the test of time, that's a very important skill set to have, all right? Especially when you have all these people that are contributing to these code bases. So anyway, let's say you do all that and you've gotten your degree, okay, or whatever, I'm just going to talk about it as if you've gotten a degree because that's the experience that I had. Well, actually, okay, let's rewind a little bit. When you're in university, one thing that I think is really important to try to do is try to get an internship as early as possible, all right? And I would say, start applying even sophomore year, all right? Just to your expectation sophomore year is to get turned down at every company you apply to. Or, like auto turned down or get an interview and turned down, yada, yada, yada. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to get a little bit of interview experience at these companies so that you know what to look for the following year. Because if you can get an internship at a place, that is going to be make your life so much easier. Because I can tell you from experience, I had my internship junior year of college. It went well. I got the return offer, and then boom, I was in. I was in big tech, and then everything from then on out is smooth sailing, right? So I'm out of the game right now, but I can jump back in because I've got a good resume built up with a lot of experience at these different companies if I want to, which I'll be reevaluating at the end of the year. But I know people who didn't get internships in college, and things worked out for them. They're doing fine now, and they've got jobs they like doing. But I could tell you it took, like, on average about a year for those people that I knew to land their first position, all right? Because they didn't have a foot in their in the door at any companies going into it. So they're kind of like cold calling a bunch of places, applying to all these different places, getting interviews, that sort of a thing. Obviously, you drill interview training, that kind of a thing, which can be kind of a miserable experience, by the way. But then, it took them about a year. They were able to land something, usually not an ideal gig, but what they did is they start off with that kind of shitty gig for, a year or two, and they're able to transition to something else. Or if they're not moving to a different company, maybe they get to a better position within the company that they're at, that sort of a thing. And so at the time, and let me just tell you, this was around, 2017, 2018 time. Things have changed since then. It's been almost a decade, which is crazy to think about. Holy shit. But anyway, things have changed slightly since then, but still, I think it's probably something that holds true. You want to get an internship, okay? But let's say, you're out of college, whatever. Let me just let me actually, before I go further here, which I don't even exactly know what I'll start talking about the kind of day-to-day life of a dev. But the thing I want to talk about is just concerns about job security, getting into the field right now, AI, all that sort of stuff. Let me just talk about it briefly, all right? I'm not the foremost expert on this kind of shit, but I just want to give you my opinions. I think that if you check all the boxes, that you like coding, that you're good at coding, that you're willing to put in the work, all that stuff, that you want to go to college to get a degree or whatever, that sort of a thing. You're doing side projects on the side. You're trying to get those internships. I don't think you're going to have any problem getting into the field when you graduate. At least if today is any indication, it may be harder to land that first position, you know, but I think you will be able to. And the reason too is that it's not just that like it's getting more competitive in the scene. That is true, especially within big tech. But the thing is, these smaller companies of a certain size, they all need developers, right? So even if your first gig is working for fucking Kroger or some shit, you know, they have a lot of tech that goes into their back end. You know, they're this huge chain. You know, they have all these different stores and shit like that, you know? Or if you're working for fucking Walmart or, you know, a bank or different financial companies or whatever, there's plenty of opportunities out there, right? So they're out there. It's just a matter of, do you want those jobs? And I would say you do want the jobs, because what you can use that as a springboard to get to the position that you actually want. So I don't think that finding a position is going to be that big of a deal. And, you know, worst comes to worst, you can do contracting, you know. You can work for one of these contracting agencies that will contract you out to these different companies, and then if you're good enough at what you're doing, what they hire you for, oftentimes those companies will like buy out your contract and hire you from that consulting agency, right? You know, it's not the ideal route, because those consulting agencies that you're going to be working for pay like dick, okay? But it's, you know, it's a jumping off point. On top of that, you could try to make your own sort of consulting business, and that would be especially effective like approaching smaller businesses. Now, of course, that sort of consulting is going to favor more of a web dev kind of a thing, you know, because what does a small business usually need? They need a website or something, or they need some sort of automation, minor automation sort of a thing, you know, but oftentimes it has to do with a website, right? And so you'd be probably wanting to look into like front-end web dev sort of shit if you're going to go that path. But this is what I'm saying, is there's a lot of opportunity out there, and you can kind of slot in a specific lane. There's a very versatile skill set, as I said, you know, and you can always do your own thing. You can try to do your own projects. I wouldn't recommend trying to just do a startup, but there's plenty of startups out there that are probably going to want your help as well. And so you can jump on board, get some experience doing that. You can, you know, probably get paid in a bunch of company equity and not much in salary, but, and, you know, maybe you'll get a nice, you know, vice president title that, you know, is meaningless ultimately, but maybe looks good on the resume. But there you go. That's what a lot of these startups do, is they kind of pay people in titles, which is interesting, but I'm not going to get into the weeds with that. In any case, as I'm saying, like, at least if today is any indication, there's plenty of opportunity out there still, in my opinion. You just have to maybe lower your expectations for where you're going to start. I think before, people were like, I'm going to be working at a big tech company, I'm going to be making six figures right off the bat. And that's still possible for sure, you know? But you may have to just, you know, settle and then move later after you've kind of gotten some experience within these smaller companies, right? But I think it's going to be fine. You know, just chill out. It's all good. It's all good. Now, as far as AI goes, you know, taking all of our jobs, et cetera, you know, I'm still skeptical about that. I've had a friend I've talked to who has his own startup, who seems to be pretty enthusiastic about the implications of AI in implementing, you know, coding, creating products. You know, I'm still skeptical, but he's got his own workflow where he's basically delegating tasks to AI agents to write code, and can apparently synthesize all that code coherently into applications, which is, you know, kind of mind-blowing to me. But regardless, I just want to say that, like, even if it is the case that the lower level coding gets replaced by AI agents, right? There's still going to need to be people that are writing those prompts and ultimately doing the design for more complicated systems, because every single system has specialized, you know, edge cases, you know, that sort of a thing. There's also going to be a huge market for troubleshooting, you know? Because if people are writing AI code, I mean, here's the thing that happens, right? If you can kind of think of AI coding, if it goes this route, which I kind of hope it doesn't, because my God, it's kind of it's another layer of abstraction almost on top of coding languages, all right? So like, what do I mean by that? Well, it's like, if you talk about languages, there's like C, you know, there's assembly, there's C, and then there's, you know, C++ and C#, and you're kind of moving up layers of abstraction, right? And so that means that you can basically capture essentially more functionality with less code. So you can be less specific about how things are done and still get the functionality that you want out of a program. The problem with abstraction is that ultimately there are going to be issues when you're losing that specificity, you know, depending on what your project is. And a lot of projects can handle that sort of a thing. Like, let's think about, you know, web services, right? Web services, a lot of the time, like the limiting factor for how performant they can be is oftentimes going to be internet connection, you know, internet latency, right? So having the most performant code in the back end isn't necessarily integral to your success of your application, right? And so you can settle for a higher level of abstraction for your coding, right? You know, sometimes, occasionally, you're going to run into weird edge case issues where there's a bug in the underlying lower level shit that you didn't realize because you're using a higher level language. I think it's going to be the same thing with AI coding if this takes off, you know, is that you're going to have AI writing a bunch of code, shit's going to go wrong, and you're still going to have subject matter experts that know how to drill in and figure out what the fuck is going wrong. On top of that, like I said, you need people integrating all of these different systems together effectively, kind of an architect role. Those are people who are going to be doing design stuff. So I think there's still going to be plenty of opportunity. It's just maybe coding will look a little bit different in the future. Who knows? You know, this is all speculation at this point. I would say don't pay too much attention to it. You know, just go to get schooling, you know. Learn about AI if it's going to be an issue. I don't think it's going to be a big deal, okay, for job opportunities is what I'm going to say. If you're good at coding, if you're good at design, all right? Beyond that, let me just talk about what the day-to-day life looked like for me in software engineering. Also, I should mention, okay, the elephant in the room is how much do you get paid? Okay. I'm not going to go into specifics about how much I got paid. I can tell you it was pretty nice, all right? But what I'm going to do is I'm going to link to a website in the description called levels.fyi, which is a crowdsourced tool, essentially, where a bunch of people report their own incomes to this website, and it kind of aggregates that data and presents it to you so you can get a feel for, like, at this level, at this company, this is about how much you would be making in salary and stock and bonuses, you know, that sort of a thing. And from what I've seen, it's pretty accurate, all right? You can filter down by area. Keep in mind this is kind of an aggregate across the country, so if you're living in bumfuck nowhere, it's maybe going to be different, okay? And once again, big tech companies pay better. Smaller companies you'd be working for, not necessarily going to be paying six figures right off the bat, but that is fine, you know? If you want to, you'll eventually be able to work for a bigger tech company. But I've exclusively worked in big tech, so that's all I can really speak about in terms of day-to-day. I'd have friends who have worked at other companies, who have worked at startups, that sort of a thing, but I don't know their experience as well as they do, so I don't want to try to, like, cover it. So instead, I'm just going to focus on what my day-to-day looked like in big tech, okay? So Company A, which once again I will not be naming because I'm going to probably badmouth the shit out of them, okay? It was kind of like I'm trying to think. When I started out, it was kind of like I was flying by the seat of my pants trying to figure shit out, and then I kind of slotted myself into kind of this deployment sort of position where I was working on the deployment for these services, which ended up having me having to learn about all the different components of this service. And so I got really good at, like, understanding the service holistically, and so then I started bootstrapping. I was the person who was bootstrapping new services for our team. I'm not going to get into detail about what they did, all right? But I can tell you that it was like I got a lot of responsibility at Company A very quickly because of the fact that I kept taking on new work and I was doing pretty well at it, and I was learning kind of our design principles. What I can tell you that Company A didn't have, and here's the thing that you got to realize about these big tech companies, is that every team is going to be different. Every organization is going to be different, all right? And so if you're thinking like, oh, I'm going to go to like Apple, or I'm going to go to Amazon, or I'm going to go to Google, and it's all going to be this kind of homogenous, similar experience, you are wrong. It's very org dependent. Google has some more kind of standardized practices that make it a little bit more samey, you know? But I can tell you that at other companies, it's not that way at all. You'll have vastly different experiences depending on where you land in the company. Now, oftentimes there will be similar stacks that are shared between teams. What I mean by stacks is like similar tools, similar, you know, frameworks being used between all these different teams, but the kind of the culture within your team, the culture within your org is going to vary drastically, like how much you value documentation, how much you value using, you know, unified frameworks, yada, yada, yada. It's all going to vary, okay? So I can tell you at Company A, finding information about specialized systems was very difficult. The documentation oftentimes wasn't there, or if it was written, you know, in some random place that was very esoteric, and you'd have to like either, you know, go searching for it or asking somebody about it. And, you know, it was difficult to find information. On top of that, there was a lot of reinventing the wheel between projects, you know. There were certain frameworks that were released, but the knowledge about those frameworks wasn't there in our org necessarily, you know. So sometimes we would have existing solutions that would fit what we were trying to do, but people just wouldn't really know about them. And so ultimately wouldn't end up using them, that sort of a thing. I can tell you that the team I was on, like I said, had a live site hell. Live site meaning being on call. So most companies, what you're going to have when you work at a big tech company or even smaller tech companies, especially startups or whatever, is there's kind of an on-call schedule, all right? Where essentially for your team, you have to be available essentially 24/7 for a certain duration of time to be able to handle customer escalations and handle issues that arise that are going to be customer impacting, right? Because nowadays, pretty much any product that you're going to be releasing at any of these companies are going to be web-based, right? Meaning that you're you know, deploying code to the cloud, yada, 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 and there's an infinite number of points where your service can break. Is it all of a sudden, oh, we lost contact with the storage provider, so now we can't save any of our data to blob storage? Or, you know, maybe our database is down, or our database ended up in a bad state and we have to restore it to a certain point in time, you know, shit like that. Things are going to go wrong. There's going to be internet issues. An infinite number of things can go wrong. And so what they have to have is they have to have devs that are on standby that can jump on, loop in the appropriate people, and solve the problem in a timely manner, or else, you know, your customers are going to complain because their products are going to be unusable for long durations of time, right? And so you get live site, you get on call, and what you're going to be doing is you're going to be waking up at odd hours of the night, getting in a call with a bunch of grumpy engineers and trying to figure out what the fuck is going on, you know? And depending on which team you're on, this can either be, you know, pretty easy, or it can be fucking hell, all right? Let me tell you. The other thing, too, is it's kind of just, you know, ruins your plans for a week, potentially, and you have to carry your laptop around with you everywhere and make sure that you have an internet connection in a place where you can sit down and, you know, get shit done, right? That sort of a thing. So, you know, it's a little bit grating, and I can tell you that the live site on my team was fucking hellish. We had these underlying services that were unreliable that we had to, like, take dependencies on in the cloud, essentially, and it ended up just being hellish, all right? We would always get looped in. In addition to that, our product was available globally, so European customers, they come online at like fucking 2 a.m. or whatever, 2 or 3 a.m. and all of a sudden they're like, our instance doesn't work. And now we're like, okay, well, fuck. Then it gets escalated to us and we got to handle it. So, on call. You need to know the dirty truth about it. It can be terrible. I can tell you some companies like Google and, some teams, it can be kind of an optional thing that you're not required to do. Although I will say probably most places it's required. But Google, it's sometimes optional. My team, it was optional. And if you do it, they pay overtime. At Company A, they did not pay overtime. It was just expected that you would do it. All right? So, don't get it twisted. The next thing I want to talk about is just what your day-to-day is going to look like. When you're starting out at a lot of these companies, you're going to have a lot more time to basically alone time is what I'd say. Just dev time, where you're kind of sitting around, you're looking, you're reading a code, you have a lot of time to sit down and just figure shit out and write out code, okay? Which is kind of awesome, all right? In my opinion, it was a great time. As you get more and more responsibility, you're going to get more and more meetings, okay? And that ends up being a huge amount of your time spent. Inevitably, like I said, if you want to progress through the ranks, you're going to have to take on more responsibility. And more responsibility means working with more teams. And oftentimes these teams, they don't want to just handle things over IM or email. They want to meet in person, and it's fucking annoying, all right? And so you're going to be working for like an hour or a half hour sometimes, which, let me be honest, you're not going to get shit done in a fucking half hour between meetings. You're going to go and get coffee. You're going to take a fucking dump from the coffee, and then it's going to be the next meeting, all right? So you're getting interrupted constantly by meetings, at odd hours of the day, and say all hours of the day, and it's going to be hard to get shit done, to the point where you're going to consider like staggering your work schedule. I mean, because these places mostly pay salary, by the way, so you can work when you want to, but that's a big kind of with a huge take that with a huge grain of salt, all right? Working when you want to also means working when you don't want to, okay, and not getting paid extra for it. I can tell you I was doing plenty of 9:30 p.m. meetings handling the contractors that were working for me on my project. Did I want to work at 9:30 p.m.? No, I didn't, but that was the only time that would kind of work for both of us where we weren't fucking zonked, So anyway, what was I talking about? You're going to want to maybe consider staggering your schedule so that you're working late. You start later and you work later because people will fuck off after 5 p.m. and you can actually get something done. That's the other thing is even if you're not having meetings, though, people are going to IM you and you're going to, be expected to respond to them because there's a bunch of dumbasses out there who can't figure things out for themselves. I shouldn't say that. I'm just a little bitter sometimes. I think that people don't put in the bare minimum amount of work to try to figure things out on their own before reaching out oftentimes, but that's a whole other can of worms, okay? So eventually you're going to have a lot of meetings. That's just like any other job, okay? So it's what you should be prepared for is if you like to code, then I would say, definitely pursue it, because I think I like coding a lot. I think it's been great to me. I'm really glad that I went into computer science and I like coding a lot. But don't be under the delusion that it's going to be like, okay, I'm going into coding. I'm going to be sitting down by myself for long periods of time, just being able to work on these projects. No, that's not the case. This is like any other job. You're going to have to meet with people. There's going to be on-call. For the entire on-call week, essentially, you can't get much done, because you have to be highly available and handling incidents, So, to put this in perspective, on my team, it was like once every 6 weeks or so, I would have to be on call. And the only thing I would work on that week would be tickets, So there's long periods of time where you're going to be on call. The only saving grace, the only nice thing about being on call is that I could decline everybody's fucking meetings, But you're going to have tons of meetings too, There's going to be issues with people bugging you all the time. Even if you write the most beautiful documentation in the world, there are going to be tons of people out there who won't fucking read it. And even if they do, they're still going to be like, hey, can I set up like a 30-minute meeting with you on like, you know, Thursday right in between your two other meetings here, so you have a half hour on either side of the meeting? And you're gonna be like, sure, dude, fuck off. You know, that sort of a thing, right? Yeah, that's about what I can think of talking about right now. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to mention. So I want to give you like a realistic view of what it looks like working in big tech. That was kind of just a high level overview. There's obviously more to it. I mean, there's shit like perks. There are good perks at a lot of these places. There's good benefits. Like I said, the pay is good. You know, that should be enough, right? So overall, TLDR, if you're interested in coding, I would definitely recommend learning it, you know, trying it out, seeing what you think. If you want to keep pursuing it, you know, just be aware that it's not like this magical career. It's just like any other job, but it pays well right now. I could still tell you that, you know, based off of the figures from levels.fyi. It may be harder to land your first position going forward, but I think that if you just are like coding, if you're good at it, if you make a point of trying to get internships during school, you're going to be good to go, you know? I think it's still worth doing. So, hope this helps. If you have any specific questions, leave them down in the comments. Yeah, hope you guys got something out of this. I hope that people out there who want to code, start coding, you know? Anyway, I'll talk to you all later. Bye-bye.